By the time I found the book, I had all but abandoned any hope of truly understanding the supernatural. As a paranormal investigator, I was known for my skepticism. My name is Robert "Rob" Mallory, and for over a decade, I had built a career based on debunking hauntings, proving that most of what people believe to be ghosts or supernatural entities could be traced back to simple explanations, faulty wiring, drafts, or the power of suggestion. I wasn't out to disprove the existence of the unknown. I just wanted to prove that people could be mistaken. But the book changed everything. It all started on a grey, cold autumn day, the kind that made the world outside my window feel distant and lifeless. The days of conducting investigations in haunted houses and cold stone churches had started to blur together. The only thing that separated one case from the next were the faces of the victims and their unnerving, often exaggerated stories. I'd grown bored. My fame in the field had become a burden, and I'd reached the point where I no longer cared to prove my point. I wanted something to break the monotony. That's when I stumbled upon the book. I had been searching for something, anything, that could provide me with a new perspective on the things I had been studying for so long. Something more than just another mistaken belief, a hoax or a fabric of human imagination. Maybe that's why I found it, hidden away on an ancient cluttered shelf in a rundown antique shop deep in the city. The shop was called Delilah's Curiosities, a dimly lit place with old wooden floors that creaked beneath my feet. The smell of incense and musty paper seemed to seep from the very walls. I had been there once or twice before, but never had anything of real interest caught my attention. But this time, something did. It was a book. No title, no markings on the cover, just an old, cracked leather binding. The pages inside were yellowed with age, their ink faded, but still legible. There was a strange weight to it, both physically and emotionally, as if the book had been waiting for me. The owner of the shop, an old man with a hunched back and thick glasses, shuffled over when he saw me reach for it. His eyes glinted, though his voice trembled when he spoke. "You found it," he rasped. I glanced up, not thinking much of it. "Found what?" "The Demon Collector's Grimoire," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Be careful with that book. It's dangerous." I laughed it off, a little unnerved by the serious tone of his warning. "I'm just looking for something to add to my research. Not exactly looking to summon demons." His gaze lingered on me for a long moment, and for the first time, I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "You don't understand. It's not just a book. You open it, and it opens everything." I shrugged it off. He was just another old man trying to make his shop seem more mysterious. "How much for it?" He gave me a long look. $50, he said, almost reluctantly. "And take my advice. Leave it closed." I handed him the money without another word, curious but dismissive of his warnings. After all, I had heard it all before, old people talking about curses and spirits. I was a man of science, not superstition. That night, as I sat at my desk in my small study, I opened the book. The cover cracked as I touched it, revealing the intricate, ancient script inside. The first few pages were filled with strange symbols, sigils, circles, lines, and incomprehensible words. But as I flipped through, something caught my eye. A single paragraph at the center of a page, written in bold script. To summon an entity from beyond the veils, one must first offer their will and recite the chant of opening. The rift, once opened, will allow passage through the cracks between worlds. But heed this: what comes through may not be what you expect. It will feed on your greatest fear. I sat there, reading it over and over. It sounded ridiculous, almost like a bad horror novel. I chuckled to myself. Summoning demons, haunting fears. It was all too preposterous, but something inside me stirred. A deep curiosity, a desire to prove that, once and for all, the supernatural was nothing more than a manifestation of human fear and delusion. I had to know. I had to prove it. The next day, I gathered what I needed: a circle of salt, black candles, a piece of chalk, and the book itself. I wasn't sure why I felt the need to go this far, but something about the ritual called to me. I couldn't back out now. If I could just summon one entity, if I could prove that it was a trick, a conjuring of the mind, I would have the ultimate evidence. I would prove that the paranormal was nothing more than human imagination gone wrong. I set everything up in the center of my study, the room dark except for the flickering candle light. I read the chant aloud, my voice shaking with excitement. Rehak nuvra strizi, drakioth razanzorkas, I recited, following the instructions to the letter. At first, nothing happened. I waited, the flickering of the candles casting strange shadows across the walls. I was beginning to think it was all just a figment of my imagination, when suddenly the temperature in the room dropped. The cold seeped into my bones, making me shiver uncontrollably. The candles flickered harder, their flames dancing wildly as the air seemed to thicken. Then a faint whisper, soft, almost imperceptible, came from somewhere behind me. You summoned me, mortal. I froze. The voice was deep and otherworldly, hollow, and filled with an ancient malice. My heart pounded in my chest. I spun around, but the room was empty. The air grew heavier, the shadows seemed to lengthen, and the floor creaked under invisible footsteps. I stepped back, my mind racing to find a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. And then I saw it. It wasn't a creature in the traditional sense. It was more like a shadow that moved with its own mind, twisting and contorting in the air. It was a distortion of space and light, a thing of fear itself. Its body, long and serpentine, seemed to bleed into the darkness around it. Eyes, countless eyes, appeared all over its form, each one glowing an unnatural green. The thing took shape, its body solidifying, and before I knew it, it stood before me. It was towering, a gargantuan figure, its face a twisted mockery of human features. Its mouth opened wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth that seemed to stretch forever. The air around it was thick with a stench of sulfur, decay, and something far worse, like the breath of death itself. You dared to call me here, mortal. Its voice echoed through my mind, not just in my ears. Now you will pay the price. I took a step back, my breath caught in my throat, my mind scrambling for an explanation. Was this real? Was I dreaming? The demon moved closer, its eyes narrowing. You will not control me, human. In a blur of motion, the demon lunged at me. Its hand, a clawed monstrosity of tendons and bone, reaching for my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Every muscle in my body froze as terror gripped me like an iron vice. You thought you could master me? The demon snarled. You are nothing to me. I gasped for air, the grip on my throat tightening. When suddenly, the room shuddered. The floor cracked beneath my feet, and the world around me began to warp, twisting, bending as though reality itself was being torn apart. In the blink of an eye, the demon was gone, vanished into the shifting shadows. I staggered, back, panting, my mind reeling. It had been real. The air was still cold. The salt circle had shattered. The candles were burning out, but the terror lingered, clinging to me like a shadow, a silent promise that this was only the beginning. I staggered backwards, my hands gripping the edge of the desk to steady myself. My breath came in shallow gasps, my heart pounding against my chest like a drum. My fingers trembled as I reached out to turn on the light, hoping for some semblance of normalcy, some assurance that what had just happened was just a hallucination. But nothing worked. The light flickered once, then died completely. The room was drowned in darkness, thick with an almost palpable sense of malevolence. A cold draft swept through the room, far colder than it should have been, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. My pulse quickened. I didn't know what to do. I should have been prepared for this, right? I was an investigator, a skeptic. Everything could be explained. Everything had a natural cause. But this was something beyond my understanding. I took a shaky step toward the door, desperate to leave, but my hand froze on the handle. The whisper came again, only this time it was louder, sharper, a voice that didn't just speak, but tore through. The air. You are not done, Robert Mallory. I spun around, the weight of the name feeling like a leaden stone in my stomach. The voice wasn't just in the room now, it was inside me, a presence so invasive that I could feel its echo in my bones. You opened the rift, the voice continued, echoing from all directions. You thought you could control me, control us. But you were wrong. You have let us in. I could hear the laugh then, low, rumbling, deep like the growl of something ancient and hungry. In that instant, I knew it wasn't just one demon I had summoned. That being was only the first. I had unwittingly opened a gateway to something darker, something far more malevolent than anything I could have imagined. The rift wasn't just a crack in reality, it was a portal, a doorway, and the creatures on the other side weren't content with just slipping through in the shadows. They were hungry, and they were coming for me. I bolted from the room, slamming the door shut behind me. My pulse raced as I ran down the hallway of my house, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I needed to find a way to fix this. I needed to undo whatever had happened before it was too late. But as I reached the staircase, I saw something that made my heart stop. A figure stood at the bottom of the stairs, obscured in the shadows. It was tall, its limbs stretched unnaturally long, each one bending at odd angles. As my eyes adjusted, I saw its skin, or rather the lack of it. The creature had smooth, glistening bone, exposed in places where its skin had been torn away. Its head was far too large for its body, a mass of flesh that bulged at odd angles. A mouth, stretching far wider than human proportions, opened slowly, revealing rows of needle-like teeth, sharp and gleaming. Its eyes were empty, hollow sockets that gazed up at me with an intelligence that chilled me to the core. I couldn't move. It was like a nightmare. One of those waking dreams where you're paralyzed, unable to scream, unable to run. My mind screamed at me to do something, anything, but my body refused to obey. It took a slow, deliberate step toward me. I couldn't breathe. And then it spoke. "Do you see now?" the creature hissed. Its voice sounded like 1,000 voices, layered on top of each other, all crying out in agony. "This is what you've unleashed, Robert Mallory. You thought you could control us, but now we are free." The weight of its words pressed down on me like a vice, and suddenly I was drowning in my own terror. The air in the room thickened, warping around me as if the very fabric of reality had been torn open. The walls around me seemed to shudder, vibrating in a low, guttural hum that rattled my bones. I could hear whispers coming from the darkness, now, hundreds of whispers, all speaking in different languages, murmuring things I couldn't comprehend, but somehow knew were threats directed at me. I forced my legs to move, pulling myself up the stairs as fast as I could. My hands grasped at the banister, my fingers sliding against the smooth wood as I fled up to my study. I slammed the door shut behind me, locking it with trembling hands. My heart hammered in my chest. For a moment, the house fell silent. I leaned against the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my thoughts racing. I didn't know what to do. What could I do? It was then that I remembered the book, the one that had started all of this, the Demon Collector's Grimoire. I had to go back. I had to find some way to close the rift, to put everything back where it belonged. But as my hand reached for the drawer where I had hidden the book, I stopped. The shadows in the room seemed to grow, stretching across the walls like living things. They moved with an unnatural fluidity, as if they were trying to reach me. I could hear the faintest scraping noise, like claws dragging across the floor. And then I saw something that froze the blood in my veins. A shape formed in the corner of the room. It was small at first, a shadow among shadows. But as it grew, it took shape, solidifying into a thing that made my stomach turn. It looked like a man, but wrong. So wrong. His skin was a patchwork of different textures, parts smooth and shiny, others cracked and brittle. His limbs were twisted at odd angles, and his face was nothing but a mask of screams. An ever-changing, contorted visage that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. You thought you could undo what has been done. The creature's voice was a harsh, grating sound like metal scraping against stone. You are the key, Robert Mallory. You opened the door, and now you will see it through. I scrambled backward, my mind racing for a way out, but there was no escape. The room was closing in around me. The walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. The floor beneath me rippled like water disturbed by some unseen force. The creature took another step forward, its eyes, no, not eyes, pools of blackness that seemed to pull at my very soul, locking onto mine. The whispers grew louder, the voices of the other creatures that had slipped through the rift, each one whispering promises of torment, of unimaginable suffering. We are everywhere now, it whispered. And it is all your fault. I slammed my fist into the drawer, forcing it open, and my fingers closed around the book. I pulled it out, holding it up like a shield, though I knew it would offer no protection. The pages were filled with unfamiliar symbols now, the ink seeming to shift and move of its own accord. I needed answers. Flipping through the pages frantically, I found the section I had missed earlier, the one that described closing the rift, but the words were in a language I could barely understand. My eyes scanned the page, trying to find anything that made sense, anything that would tell me how to end this nightmare. But as I read, the room around me began to change. The air thickened, pressing in on me, and the temperature dropped so low that I could see my breath fogging in the air. The shadows in the room seemed to shift and twist, as if they were alive, moving toward me with a sinister purpose. You can't stop it now, the creature said again. The rift is open. You have fed us your fear, and now we will feast. I could feel it then. Something was watching me. Not just the creature, but something much larger, something older, deeper. A presence that existed beyond the rift, beyond the veil of reality. I could feel its weight pressing on me, pushing me toward the edge of insanity. I closed the book, my mind racing. I had to act. I had to do something. I couldn't let them consume me. I had to find a way to stop it before it was too late. But no matter how hard I tried, no matter how many times I read the words in the book, there was one thing that I knew deep down. I was not the one in control anymore. I had opened the rift, and now I would be its prisoner. The darkness in the room surged forward, its whispers filling my ears, drowning out everything else. The creatures had come, and they were hungry. They were here, and there was no turning back. The air in the room was thick with a suffocating darkness. The shadows, once fleeting, now moved in deliberate, calculated motions, each one a silent predator creeping toward me. I could hear them, even when I couldn't see them. A faint rustling in the air like 1,000 whispers stitched together into a single sound. The creatures were drawing closer, closing in around me. My fingers trembled as I flipped through the pages of the book, once more searching for something, anything that could help. The symbols, the incantations, they blurred together like a fever dream. My mind was slipping, every word on the page an alien symbol, a puzzle I couldn't solve. The more I tried to focus, the more the words danced just out of reach, as though mocking me. I couldn't breathe. The walls felt as though they were closing in on me. The shadows had shape now, They weren't just random, shifting images of terror. No, these were intelligent, deliberate forms. I could hear them whisper, low and guttural. They were talking to me, but their words were fragmented, disjointed fragments of sentences. You opened the door, Robert. You can never close it. You are ours now. My hands flew over the pages in desperation, my eyes scanning faster and faster as though reading quickly would somehow stop the inevitable. I had to find a way out. I couldn't die like this. Not like some helpless victim in a story. Not like all the people I had exposed as frauds, those who had fallen victim to their own fears. I was better than this. I had to be. But the words I read on the pages now made no sense. The symbols were changing as I looked at them. They writhed, slithering like living things. And I realized this was not a book. It was something worse, something older, a trap, a contract. The book itself was a tool, a weapon to bind me here, to bind me to them. The demons were not just inside the house. They were inside my mind, inside my body, pulling at the very fabric of my consciousness. I slammed the book shut and the room shook violently. The sound of cracking wood, like bones breaking, reverberated through the walls. My heart pounded in my chest and I stumbled back, my legs giving way. My mind was spinning. The door behind me burst open with a deafening crash and I whirled around, knowing what I would see before I even looked. The creature from the stairs was there, its grotesque form filling the doorway. Its eyes, those empty, cavernous pits, stared at me with a knowing, predatory gleam. You can't escape. The demon's voice was a mixture of laughter and contempt, deep and ancient, reverberating through the air like a sonic boom. The rift is here. We are here. You are ours, Robert Mallory. I scrambled to my feet, backed into the far corner of the room, my chest heaving as I gasped for air. The demon advanced slowly, savoring my fear. The other shadows in the room seemed to come alive, moving closer, slithering toward me like serpents. Pushed myself to my feet. My vision swam. There had to be a way out. There had to be. I remembered the ritual from the book, the one about closing the rift. It was impossible, wasn't it? The demons had already crossed through. Could I banish them? Could I somehow stop them from spreading further? I had no time. The thing was moving toward me, its clawed hand outstretched, ready to claim me. I ran for the door, desperate to escape. My feet barely touched the ground as I bolted down the hallway, heart pounding in my chest. The shadow. I reached the front door and threw myself against it, only to find it locked. My fingers fumbled for the handle, my breath ragged and uneven. I looked back over my shoulder, and that's when I saw it. An army of them, emerging from the corners of the room, from cracks in the walls, from the very air itself. More demons, all different shapes and sizes. Some were humanoid, others were twisted, insect-like creatures, their limbs ending in sharp, jagged claws. Some were floating, others skittering across the floor like spiders, all of them hungry, all of them waiting for me to fall. I screamed, slamming my shoulder into the door, but it wouldn't budge. The weight of it, the sheer horror, crushed me, my vision blurred with tears, my mind a whirlwind of panic and disbelief. No, I whispered, shaking my head. No, this isn't real. But it was. It was real. The first of the demons reached me then, its claws sharp and cold as they wrapped around my throat. I gasped for air, choking, but it was no use. The demon's grip tightened. My vision swam, the edges of reality beginning to blur as the shadows grew deeper, darker. The demon leaned in close, its rancid breath hot against my ear. We told you there was no escape. The words were no longer an echo. They were a promise, the final promise of a nightmare. I fought with every ounce of strength I had left, I clawed at the demon's hand, kicking at its legs, but it was futile. The room around me seemed to spin, the floor beneath me warping as if reality itself was crumbling away. The rift had opened, and there was no going back. I felt the weight of the darkness bearing down on me, each second stretching out as I struggled in vain. My breath became shallow, my vision narrowed to a single point of white-hot terror, and then the demon's voice again. But this time it was in my mind. The laughter was inescapable, filling my skull, drowning me in its madness. There is no escape, Robert Mallory. The cold fingers of the demon dug deeper into my throat. I felt the last vestiges of my will being pulled away, my thoughts dissolving, consumed by the overwhelming fear. The walls shook again, but this time it wasn't just the walls. The whole house seemed to shift, like it was coming apart at the seams. I could hear the whispers, louder now, more insistent, coming from every direction, from every crack, from every shadow. I closed my eyes, unable to fight it anymore. I had brought this on myself. I had opened the rift, and now it was too late. As the darkness closed in, swallowing the last of my thoughts, I knew. This was how it ends. There was no escape. I was theirs. The house stood quiet in the dim light of dawn, untouched by time. The world outside remained blissfully unaware of the horrors that had unfolded within. The rift remained open, and the demons, they were still there, waiting, always waiting, for the next fool to come along, for the next soul to tear open the fabric of reality, just as Robert Mallory had. Because there was always someone willing to summon them, and once they came, they never left.